Hello everybody, it's NerdGasm. I'm back with you to review yet another retro superhero game, an X-Men one, simply titled X-Men, released exclusively for the Sega Genesis back in 1993. It's a side-scrolling platformer that has you play as 4 different X-Men, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Gambit, and Cyclops, each with their own unique mutant powers. Wolverine can attack enemies with his claws, and possesses his iconic healing factor, though it is limited, and honestly, sometimes I wonder if it's even working properly, but trust me, it's there. Cyclops can fire optic blasts out of his eyes with a press of a button, and by holding it down, along with the D-pad, you can fire it in several different directions, which is pretty awesome. Gambit can throw kinetically charged playing cards at his foes, and strike them with his staff. Nightcrawler is easily the best character in this game. He's kind of overpowered. Though his base attacks are really weak, you can use his teleportation ability to phase through walls and floors, essentially breaking the game in areas. If you master it enough, you can avoid taking damage, and even hurt enemies by holding down the teleport button while stationary, which uses little to no mutant power at all. It's kind of ridiculous. X-Men has you battle your way through 6 levels, set within the Savage Land, the Shi'ar Empire, Excalibur's Lighthouse, a war-torn Sentinel Future, Mojo World, and Asteroid M. You face off with classic X-Men villains, such as Juggernaut, Sabretooth, Apocalypse, Deathbird, and of course, Magneto, just to name a few. Throughout the levels, you can pick up icons that allow you to summon additional X-Men, like Storm, Rogue, and Archangel, to aid you in battles. At certain points, you will also need Iceman to create ice bridges for you to cross, and proceed further, and Jean Grey saves you whenever you fall, though you will still take damage, so I guess she's not fast enough. In between each level, you will find yourself in the Danger Room for a certain amount of time. During these sections, you will want to destroy as many floating training orbs as you can to replenish your health before you take on the next mission, and this brings me to the story of this game. X-Men centers around their arch-enemy, Magneto, infecting the Danger Room with a virus that disables the controls and safety limits, and traps the X-Men inside. Each stage of the game places you in a different location against a series of enemies and even notable supervillains. After defeating each stage, the Danger Room essentially recalibrates itself to increase its difficulty and threat levels, which is a fun and clever way of explaining the game's progression. It also makes for an easy way for the X-Men to travel to various environments, and the game to feature a wide range of supervillains, without the need of any real explanation or context. On one hand, this is great, because you get to battle a bunch of different villains, one after the other. There's a lot of variety to the visuals and the obstacles you are faced with, but I'd be lying if I said this didn't make the whole game feel a little underwhelming as well. There's a bit of a disconnect with everything, because all of the villains you battle, apart from Magneto of course, aren't real, technically speaking. They're artificial versions of themselves. Everything you see is just a fabrication. You always have the thought of the X-Men just battling computer programs in the back of your mind, not the real deal, which makes it all feel a lot less impressive than it should be. I hate to say it. The level, set within the Shi'ar Empire, has a moment in it when you meet Empress Lilandra, who tells the X-Men that she is in fact real, and that she had brought them there so they could defeat her sister, Deathbird, before sending them back to Earth. But this is just another program tricking the X-Men, because if it were real, then that means Lilandra had transported the X-Men out of the Danger Room, and putting them back into it afterwards makes absolutely no sense. While the X-Men are dealing with the Danger Room's deadly programs, Professor X is trying to put a stop to it, and contacts the X-Men from the outside. At one point, he tells them that the Danger Room computer needs to be reset, and there is a pretty cool fourth wall breaking moment in this game, within the Mojos Crunch level. At the end of it, you destroy a computer monitor, and wait for the game to proceed to the next section, only nothing happens. You just sit there, waiting and waiting. What you have to do to continue on with the game is reset your Sega Genesis console. You heard me right, reset. In an era of gaming where even contemplating doing something like that would have been batshit insane, you would have run the risk of losing all of your progress. It's not like you had the option of saving back then. The fact that the developers assumed gamers would have picked up on this is absurd, especially with how cryptic Professor X's reset line had been. You want to know how they could have really broken the fourth wall in this game? Get Professor X to look right at you through the screen and say, "Hey numbnuts, reset your fucking Genesis." That way, they wouldn't have had to beat around the bush like they did. And I mean, that's interactive for the player, right? Insulting them right to their face like that? Despite this incredibly cryptic moment in the Mojos Crunch level, I actually really enjoy this part of the game. Mojo's level is the most visually striking and memorable out of all the areas you go to, in my opinion. Fighting Mojo is really interesting and unique as well, because he's not in a whole lot of Marvel games, especially the more modern ones. That said, his level is one of the hardest in the game, downright frustrating in areas. It has a time limit, indicated by Mojo's outstretched face on the side, and it's very tricky to navigate, with all of those giant fire pillars that pop up, disappearing platforms, and TVs that explode behind you if you get too close. It's quite stressful. And this brings me to the biggest flaw of this game, the difficulty. Despite X-Men on Sega Genesis being one of the best X-Men games ever released, it's really tough to recommend it to your average gamer, especially the more modern and mainstream ones, comfortable with multiple lives, checkpoints, and the ability to save your progress at will and whatnot. X-Men is one of the hardest superhero games I've ever played. The platforming can be really aggravating because you have to be really accurate with your jumps. Sometimes you fall right through platforms, and because all of the levels are filled to the brim with ledges and gaps, be prepared to face this dilemma over and over again. Health pickups are also scarce, which makes the game feel very unbalanced in that regard. You can switch between the X-Men, and they each have their own health and energy meters, but if all of them are near death, you won't have enough time to adequately heal each one of them in between levels in the Danger Room, before the next one loads. The final level on Asteroid M is impossible. Magneto's acolytes have laser guns, and if you get hit with them, they trap you within an electrical field, draining your health, and essentially killing you in one hit. You are forced to just sit there, watching your X-Men squirm and then die. You might as well take my controller away. I have never been able to beat this game legitimately, and most likely never will, which is why I had to use several Game Genie codes to get all the footage needed for this review. When I play this game casually without invincibility, I always use a few Game Genie codes by default anyways. The one that makes Wolverine's claws cost no mutant energy, because this shit was so stupid in a lot of these older X-Men games. You should be able to use them whenever. The one that prevents all fall damage, because like I previously mentioned, you will find yourself falling a lot, because the jumping is just so terrible. That's where I lose most of my health in this game. And finally, the last code I use is the one that gives you the ability to switch out the X-Men an infinite amount of times within levels, because the game restricts you in doing so. I feel since they are all trapped within the Danger Room anyways, it just makes more sense to me to have them all at the ready, to help each other out when they are in a pickle. I mean, why not? X-Men on Genesis has its problems, mainly with its insane difficulty, but it's still a very solid game, one of the best based off our beloved team of mutant superheroes. Graphically, this game still holds up rather strongly, with its visual style based on the amazing artwork by Jim Lee found in the comics at the time, and while its story, centering around Magneto infecting the Danger Room computer with a virus, does feel a bit too basic for my liking, a little underwhelming, taking into account the fact that all these supervillains you are fighting aren't the real baddies, just hologram versions of them, I still do lean more towards this concept being brilliant rather than lazy. It was a clever way to explain the inclusion of all these characters and locations, being that this is a video game after all. I think this kind of story does work. It has more pros than cons. The negatives I was mentioning earlier, they were mainly nitpicks, just for the sake of this review. But I'd like to hear what you guys think of X-Men on Sega Genesis down in the comments section below. If you've played it, let me know the experiences you've had with it, and if you consider it to be one of the greatest X-Men games of all time. I want to thank you all for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already, and help support the creation of future content by becoming a producer over on Patreon.com. I will see you all in the next one. Take care and stay nerdy.